everybody, what's up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, and today we're going to be discussing the final 5 John or Jane Doe cases that have been identified this year of 2022. I know this is kind of like a different background, but I wanted to do something different. So, if you're new here, thank you for clicking on my video. Thank you for coming and watching my content. That means a lot to me. I did just pass my 1 year here on YouTube, so yay, 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 yay. And thank you to all of my returning subscribers who keep coming back and watching more of my content. Again, if you're new and I piqued your interest of talking about true crime cases, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn your bell notifications on to all. That way you know whenever I upload. And don't forget to like and comment on my videos as well. Now, the first case we're going to be discussing in this last part is the Babes in the Wood, which I have also covered in a previous video. I'll put it in a card above. So, like I just mentioned, I've already covered this case, but the Babes in the Wood is not to be confused with the 1934 murders of the same name. There's 2 different murder cases called the Babes in the Woods, and 2 different times. So one was in 1953 and one was in 1934. So 20-year difference. But I'm also thinking of covering that case, so stay tuned. So this is a case of 2 sets of small children, like their remains that were found in Stanley Park in 1953. Now, the remains were skeletal, and they were of 2 small-sized children that were found, and this became quite an infamous murder. It was determined that these children, in fact, were killed by a hatchet. Specifically, they were bludgeoned to death with it in 1953. And finally, after 70 years of them not being identified, the Vancouver police revealed that these 2 were finally identified as 6-year-old David and 7-year-old Derek Dalton, and they were the Babes in the Wood. These boys, unfortunately, were never reported missing back in the 50s, which you think if you were their family members, you would kind of want to report them missing because, I mean, they were 6 and 7, so they're pretty young, but I digress. And it also came out that these were half-brothers that lived in poverty when they were alive. So they, after finding that out, it actually makes more sense that why they weren't reported missing, because at that time, desperate times are desperate measures. This was in 1953. So if you were a poverty-stricken family, most of the time, like, everybody worked, as sad as it may be. So after their identification, the police also let out that the family quickly changed their surname to Bosquet. I'll put it in the little text thing if I pronounced it wrong. I know it's a French last name, or Bosquet. And they changed their last name sometime after the boys were killed in the 50s. The police also think that the murder likely took place 5 years prior to them being found by the groundskeeper of Stanley Park near Beaver Lake. The boys were hidden underneath some thick brush, and they were also covered by a woman's coat. So this kind of indicates that whoever killed them, or possibly watched whoever killed them kill them, felt something for these boys. Could have been like a familial feeling. For me, I think like that's a mother's thing. You're covering these children so you don't have to see it, or it's a womanly thing to cover these children so you don't have to see their dead bodies. So Redgrave Research Forensics Services in Massachusetts, it was contracted to help with identifying these boys, so they're the ones that helped. I've talked about Redgrave before, I've talked about Othram, and I've talked about Parabon Nanolabs, and all of them are fantastic. So number 2 on today's video is Susan Lund. Now, Susan Lund vanished on Christmas Eve of 1992 at around 7:30 p.m. And this is when she walked to her local grocery store from her home in Clarksville. January 1993, so literally a month later, police in southern Illinois discovered the remains of a person, in particular just the head was found at the Wayne Fitzgerald State Park, which is about 180 miles away from Montgomery County, so Clarksville, of where Susan Lund went missing. Now, her husband Paul was a soldier at Fort Campbell at the time when his wife went missing, and he indeed did report her missing. So it wasn't like she kind of like vanished and nobody reported her missing or didn't report her missing, like Carl Isaacs Jr. Still blows my mind, but her husband did indeed report her missing. Now, Paul and Susan, so her husband Paul and her, they met while they were in high school. They were high school sweethearts. They married. They had 3 children together. And also at the time when Susan disappeared, she was also pregnant with their 4th child. So this kind of like is not just one missing person, it's also 2 missing people because she is with child. Redgrave Research Forensic Services was used in identifying Susan Lund, and they also released the information that she may have had torticollis, or what is known as wry neck syndrome. Her head was the only thing that they had to use and help make a break in the case many years later, and her official name at the time when she was unidentified was Ina Jane Doe. Now, Redgrave used DNA from the head to see if they could find a close relative by uploading the DNA to GEDmatch. There was a potential match and the family was contacted, and her positive identification was made on March 11th of 2022. And she went 29 years without her name. So Susan finally got her name back, and her family finally found out what happened. This next one is a little more hard on my heart when I was looking into this, but number 3 for today is William Deshawn Hamilton. The skeletonized remains of a 6-year-old boy was found in a shallow grave by a cemetery worker in a wooded area near the cemetery that is at Clifton Springs and Clifton Church Road in Decatur, Georgia, on December 26th of 1999. His body seemed to have been left there for quite some time due to nature kind of like wreaking havoc and taking its course, and basically made his body unidentifiable. Police in the area were unable to find any notice of a missing child in this particular area, especially a very well cared for child. Now, when they examined his remains, they were able to determine he was well fed, he was well groomed. Like, it was kind of like, how did this child get here? They also were able to tell that he had no malnutrition, like no broken bones, none of that. He was very well cared for. His cause of death was never actually determined, but during his autopsy, they were able to find out that there was a presence of cold medicine that they were able to detect, or remnants of cold medicine, if you will. Now, for years, police tried to figure out who this young child was, and they finally would make a break in the case many years later, many years later. Now, there was a call that came in October of 1999 from a woman that used the name Dawn Anderson, which could have been a pseudonym, and stated that the boy's name was Cabell Brown. The woman on the phone was in hysterics, it was hard for them to understand what she was saying, and this phone call was indeed recorded. Now, this phone call was also traced to a place in Florida, the Florida Institution of Technology in Melbourne, Florida, but the woman was unable to be located after the call was made. So that kind of that was a donezo. They were also unable to locate any missing persons report with that name in that specific area. So that was also a dud. But, this case would finally break some ground 21 years after he was discovered. So in May of 2020, NCMEC from a person who said they recognized the boy from an updated rendering of this John Doe's facial reconstruction. With the tip, the police went to work. With the help of this tip, they were able to use DNA extracted from the body to help identify this boy in February of 2022. But it wouldn't be made public until June. The reason for this is because they needed to build a case, and I'll kind of get to why. So in June of 2022, this body was identified as William Deshawn Hamilton, who went by the nickname Dennis. And Dennis went missing from Charlotte, North Carolina in December of 1998. So literally 1 entire year before he was discovered, he went missing. The police were also able to figure out that Dennis was with his mother in North Carolina at the time he went missing as well, which kind of made things a little fishy. This is why they needed to build a case. So on June 28th of 2022, 45-year-old Teresa Ann Bailey Black was indicted on suspicion of murder in the death of her son, William Deshawn Hamilton. She was arrested in Phoenix, Arizona, and was extradited back to DeKalb County, Georgia, for her upcoming trial. Now, it's believed that Teresa moved almost immediately after the death of Dennis and never reported him missing whatsoever. What a good mom, right? It also came out that they believe that his own mother poisoned him with cold medicine and then struck him over the head with an unknown object. At this current time, this case is still pending. Number 4 is Patricia Cavallaro. So the partially buried body of a deceased woman was found on October 24th of 1994 in an area between Date Palm Drive and Ramon Road in Thousand Palms, California. Now, after the discovery of this body, the police would have sketches of her face that circulated in the area, but the case just grew cold. This case would then be taken over by the Cold Case Unit or Cold Case Homicide Team, run by the DA's office. And they did this so that they could focus on genetic material recovered from the remains, specifically so that they could upload it to the missing and unidentified persons system in California. Now, with using this type of technology, they were able to track down a potential match for this doe. The DNA sample was able to match to that of a 20-year-old missing persons case, particularly to the son of this missing person. Now, the DNA sample that was provided from the son of this victim was then processed against the DNA from this Jane Doe by Othram. Now, it was fully confirmed on June 3rd of 2022, after 27 years with no name. This Jane Doe, this body that was found on October 24th of 1994, was that of 57-year-old Patricia Cavallaro. Now, the weird part about this case is that Patricia died in 1994, but her husband never reported her missing until 2001. So why wait 7 years? It's just so weird. Her husband did tell police that she just simply vanished after leaving home, and he never knew what happened to her. Her husband did die in 2017, and his name has never been publicly, voiced. Her death still remains, a ridiculous mystery, what happened? It's still an open case, and it's still unsolved, but we know who this Jane Doe is. So number 5 on our list actually ties in with another case that I will be covering. If it's not within this next week, it will be the week after, so probably around Thanksgiving. We're going to be talking about Patricia or Patsy Skiple. So the blue Pacheco Jane Doe, and that was found in 1993, specifically on June 3rd of 1993. She was found when a trucker stopped to pee and found the body of a woman off of a turnout on the westbound side of State Route 152, which is on the Pacheco Pass Highway near Gilroy, California. So homicide was suspected as the manner of death, specifically strangulation, specifically manual strangulation. If you know where I'm going with this, then you know where I'm going with this. Her body also appeared to have just been dumped there. They were able to determine that this was a female. She was between the ages of 30 and 40, 5'3" in height, approximately 130 pounds, and she was only there for a few weeks. They believe that this woman was indeed a victim of Keith Hunter Jesperson, aka the Happy Face Killer, who did indeed confess to her murder and is currently serving 4 consecutive life sentences. Now, when he confessed to her murder, he claimed that her name was either Carla or Cindy, but that in fact, that was not her name. Her name was Patricia. So the DNA Doe Project teamed up with the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office to help identify the woman that was found in 1993, and they were able to use genetics to find a match for the Pacheco Jane Doe in 2021. Now, after they found a likely match, it was a hard time for them to find a match. I'll say this, because her ancestry was wasn't very grounded in the United States. Her ancestry was primarily from Norway, recently from Norway. So with this, it gave super distant matches, and then you have to create a tree off of that to identify said person. But with the genome they were able to create, they uploaded it to GEDmatch and to Family Tree DNA. Now, the match they ended up with, this led to the identification of 45-year-old Patricia Skiple, who went missing on November 12th of 1992 in Molalla, Oregon. And her formal identification was made public 28 years after, on April 19th of 2022. Now, like I said before, the blue Pacheco Jane Doe was one of 3 Jane Does that is attached to the Happy Face Killer, and like I previously stated, that's kind of where I was going with this. I will be covering this in a future video. So just kind of stay tuned with that one. But that, my friends, I don't know what that awkward pause was, so you're welcome for how weird I've been in this video. But I hope you guys enjoyed part 4 of does that have been identified in 2022, and I will see you guys in another video.